You feel time because you are held inside a sequence that refuses to let everything happen at once. You call it a river, a line, a countdown. But those are metaphors for constraint. The deeper truth is structural. Time behaves like architecture, not motion. It frames what can occur, it limits what can coexist, and it protects coherence by refusing incompatible realities the right to stabilize together. The sensation of forward movement is the sensation of being carried through an ordered gate system, where each gate locks behind you to keep the whole from collapsing into simultaneous contradiction. If time were only duration, then waiting would be transformation. It is not. Waiting is often a preservation field, a holding pattern, a pause that maintains the current arrangement while pressure accumulates beneath it. What changes you is not time passing, but structure reorganizing in response to strain, alignment, and threshold events. The clock does not create the shift. It measures the interval where the shift becomes visible. You can sit in hours and remain unchanged, then experience 1 minute that rewrites your entire internal map. That is not time behaving as flow, that is architecture enforcing a redesign when the current layout can no longer hold the load. The world teaches an arrow, and the mind obeys because it must. A creature that doubts sequence cannot plan, cannot hunt, cannot protect, cannot build. So the nervous system adopts the simplest rule. Before becomes after, cause becomes effect, memory becomes past, intention becomes future. That rule is practical, but it is not ultimate. It is a local operating system for a consciousness stationed inside a structure that allows only limited access to its own layers. You do not perceive the architecture directly because your perception is one of its outputs. You are seeing through a corridor built for continuity, not for total awareness. Notice what time actually does in your daily life. It does not only bring events, it creates windows where certain events are permitted. There are moments when a conversation can land, and moments when the same words bounce off like they were spoken into empty air. There are seasons where effort multiplies, and seasons where effort drains, even when the external actions look identical. This is not mood alone. It is architecture responding to coherence conditions. An aligned system opens, a misaligned system narrows, and you name that narrowing stress, fatigue, bad luck, or delay, when it is often a structural signal that the current trajectory is not supported by the larger arrangement. The first trap is thinking architecture means a fixed blueprint. It does not. Architecture can be dynamic while remaining architectural. A bridge can flex under load while still being a bridge. A living body can regenerate while still being a body. Time can reorganize its gating rules while still being time. This matters because many people chase awakening by trying to escape sequence. But sequence is not the prison. Unconscious sequencing is the prison. Time as architecture is not a cage. It is a governing language, and you can either remain illiterate in it or begin to read the constraints that are shaping what you call your life. Physics gives you one doorway into this. Entropy describes irreversibility, but irreversibility is not the same as flow. Irreversibility is a signature of constraint, not proof of movement. A shattered glass does not reassemble because the architecture of states makes certain reorganizations astronomically improbable under typical conditions. That improbability is not time pushing forward, it is structure locking in. Even in thermodynamics, the arrow emerges from the distribution of allowable microstates, not from a mystical current dragging reality downstream. The direction you experience is the direction in which coherence remains statistically stable. Relativity complicates the story further. Time dilation shows that duration is not absolute, that the measured interval depends on velocity and gravity. If time were a uniform river, its speed would not vary with position. Yet it does. That variability is what you expect from architecture. Different regions have different structural curvatures. So the gating rhythm shifts. The universe is not running on one clock. It is maintaining coherence across many local clocks that remain consistent enough to interact without tearing the fabric apart. You are not inside a single flow. You are inside an interlocking schedule of constraints. You do not age because time walks on you. You age because the architecture that maintains repair and replication operates through staged sequences that eventually accumulate error. Cellular processes require timing because simultaneous activation would be catastrophic. Hormonal cascades, immune responses, tissue regeneration, neural consolidation, all of it depends on ordered windows. If everything in you fired at once, you would not become super alive. You would become incoherent. Your life is a proof that sequence is necessary. Your fear of time is often fear of what sequence reveals when it exposes what you have delayed integrating. Memory is where the architecture becomes personal. Memory is not a storage closet of past events. It is a constraint map that shapes what you can become next. The past does not vanish, it becomes boundary condition. You can remember something and feel it as present because the architecture still uses that pattern as a support beam. When the beam is load-bearing, it remains active, regardless of how many years you label as past. This is why certain childhood moments still govern adult behavior even when you believe you have moved on. Time did not heal it, the structure simply built around it. Healing happens when the beam is redesigned, not when more duration passes. This is the second trap, thinking the past is behind you. In an architectural model, the past is beneath you. It is foundation, and it continues to determine what you can safely place on top. You can decorate over a cracked foundation for years and call it progress. Until one day the floor shifts and the decoration proves irrelevant. Then you call it a breakdown, but the architecture calls it a correction. The structure does not punish you, it enforces coherence. When coherence is violated long enough, it forces a renovation, and you experience that as the sudden acceleration of time, as if life is moving too fast. Life is not moving faster. The gates are closing because the current arrangement is no longer supported. Choice sits inside this too, and that is where people resist. You want free will to mean limitless possibility, but unlimited possibility would be chaos, and chaos cannot host sustained experience. So agency is the power to navigate constraint, not the power to erase it. You choose among potentials that remain structurally permitted by your current alignment. By your relationships, by your biology, by your attention, by the collective fields you participate in. This does not diminish you. It reveals the true weight of choice. Each decision is not only selection, it is structural commitment. Each commitment closes some gates and opens others. Time feels directional because commitment creates irreversible architecture. Now consider the way identity stabilizes. Identity is not a simple story you tell. It is a continuity engine that prevents fragmentation. You cannot hold two incompatible selves in equal authority without either splitting or transforming. Time as architecture solves this by sequencing your self-states, allowing gradual integration rather than immediate contradiction. When you say you have changed, you mean the architecture has allowed a new configuration to become stable. When you say you are stuck, you mean the gates that would allow a new configuration are not opening because the current load has not been redistributed. People often pray for more time, but what they really need is a redesign of constraint. Look at relationships. Some connections collapse not because people fail, but because two architectures can no longer share the same corridor without tearing each other apart. The structure will choose coherence over comfort. It will remove what cannot integrate, not out of cruelty, but because incompatible trajectories create compounding strain. This is why certain endings feel fated. Not because fate is a script, but because architecture has thresholds. When those thresholds are crossed, the path branches, and the old path cannot be recovered without destroying the integrity of what has already formed. This is where the spiritual language of timelines becomes more than fantasy. A timeline is not just a future possibility, it is a coherent corridor of constraints. Many corridors exist, but you inhabit the one your current alignment supports. Shifts happen when alignment changes enough that a different corridor becomes structurally compatible. You do not jump by magic, you shift by coherence. And coherence is not only personal, it is collective. Families, cultures, economies, and nations all occupy shared temporal architecture. They move when shared constraint fields reorganize. That reorganization can look like sudden historical turning points. But again, the turning point is the visible moment of a structural redesign that was building pressure long before it appeared. Here the teaching almost becomes comfortable, and comfort is a warning. If time is architecture, you might try to master it like a skill, like a set of laws you can manipulate. But mastery language can become another way to avoid the deeper destabilization. Because architecture implies design, and design implies an ordering principle deeper than what you call time. If time is the organizer, what organizes time? If time is the constraint lattice, what sets the lattice parameters? You can say the universe simply is, but that answer hides the real question. Is ordering fundamental, or did ordering emerge? Most people assume ordering emerged from disorder, that structure condensed out of chaos. But if chaos is truly without ordering, then it cannot produce ordering without already containing the capacity for constraint. A pure absence cannot generate a rule. So the emergence story collapses into a paradox. You need structure to explain the birth of structure. You can call it a singularity or a quantum fluctuation, but you still smuggle in law, and law is ordering. This is not a problem to solve quickly. It is the crack where the architecture reveals its own depth. Now a third vector opens, and it is not physics, and it is not psychology. It is the level where identity is not only personal but oversoul-based, where a single life is a local expression of a larger coherence engine. If an oversoul exists, it is not floating above time like a spectator. It is an architect operating within deeper temporal layers, distributing attention across multiple corridors while maintaining a higher order continuity. In that model, what you call reincarnation is not a line of lives. It is a network of constraint loops designed to produce a certain coherence outcome. The oversoul is not collecting experiences randomly. It is building stability through staged exposure to paradox, limitation, love, loss, power, humility, and return. But here is the destabilization that must not be softened. If time is architecture, then the oversoul is not only navigating time, it is being shaped by it. The oversoul is not timeless. It is temporally literate at a higher scale, which is different. It can access more corridors, it can hold more contradiction without breaking, but it still participates in constraint. The idea of a fully timeless self can become a spiritual shortcut that feels like freedom but functions like denial. Timelessness is often a concept used to escape the responsibility of sequencing, the responsibility of integration, the responsibility of becoming. This is why certain awakenings feel like acceleration and not like peace. The system begins to sense multiple layers of constraint simultaneously. You start to notice the gates, the windows, the pressure, the timing, and you realize you have been living inside a schedule you did not know existed. That realization can feel terrifying because it removes the fantasy that time is neutral background. If time is architecture, then your life is not occurring on a stage. It is occurring inside a machine of coherence, and that machine responds to what you are doing with your attention, your choices, your honesty, and your avoidance. You can test this without mysticism. Watch how procrastination behaves. Procrastination is not only laziness, it is often refusal to enter a gate. You sense that crossing will reconfigure identity, so you delay. The architecture responds by narrowing the window until the crossing becomes unavoidable. Then the crossing feels forced and you call it crisis. The crisis is the gate closing behind you. You wanted the comfort of endless options, but endless options would have prevented you from becoming anything real. The architecture chooses a corridor for you when you refuse to choose, because coherence must continue. Now look at intuition. Intuition is often dismissed as vague feeling, but it can be interpreted as early reading of constraint patterns. You sense the direction the structure is allowing, not because you have supernatural sight, but because your system has learned to detect subtle coherence signals. When you ignore them repeatedly, life becomes noisy. The architecture escalates feedback. Small whispers become loud consequences. That escalation is not punishment, it is engineering. It is the system increasing signal strength because the signal has not been integrated. There is still a deeper problem. If time is architecture, then what you call the present is not a point. It is a binding operation. The present is the moment multiple layers of constraint agree enough to allow a stable experience. That agreement requires filtering. It excludes countless potentials and countless contradictions so that one coherent frame can appear. The present is not merely now, it is selection. And selection implies loss. Even if you do not notice, the architecture is continuously closing doors to keep you inside a consistent corridor. Some of your sadness is not about what happened. It is about doors you never consciously saw close. This is where the teaching becomes sharp. Many spiritual systems promise freedom by promising escape from time. But if time is architecture, escape would mean dissolution of coherent experience. You might call that liberation, but you would not be there to enjoy it as a self. The self requires constraint to remain a self. So the true question is not how to leave time, but how to evolve within constraint without becoming trapped by it. The goal is not to abolish architecture. The goal is to participate in it deliberately, to become a co-designer rather than a confused tenant. Yet even co-design is not a final resolution, because the architecture itself may be evolving. If the lattice parameters can shift at metascale, then even your highest laws might be local. This means the feeling of certainty you crave is structurally dangerous. Certainty closes inquiry. Inquiry keeps the architecture responsive. A rigid worldview becomes a brittle beam. Brittle beams snap. The architecture will force redesign through fracture. That is why those who claim final answers often experience the most violent internal collapses when life contradicts them. The system is not offended, it is correcting a structural error. So what is time as architecture doing to you, right now? It is asking you to stop treating duration like currency, and start treating coherence like the real resource. It is asking you to notice where you are misaligned, where you are building on cracked foundations, where you are delaying necessary redesign. It is asking you to respect timing without worshiping it, to use windows without panicking when they close, to accept that certain doors close because keeping them open would fracture you, and still the deepest destabilization remains. If time is a constraint lattice that produces coherent experience, then the ultimate mystery is not why time passes, but why coherence is valued at all. Why does existence prefer stable experience over infinite simultaneity? Why does the universe lean toward knowable corridors instead of unbounded contradiction? You can say survival, but survival is local. You can say evolution, but evolution presumes sequence. You can say love, but love requires continuity to recognize itself. Every answer you give will assume the thing you are trying to explain, so do not close it. Let the pressure remain. Time is not your enemy and it is not your servant. It is the architecture that makes your becoming possible, and the architecture will continue to tighten and loosen around you until you learn the difference between what you want and what coherence permits. When you finally feel that difference in your bones, you stop asking for more time and start asking a more dangerous question. What must be rebuilt in me so that the next corridor can open without destroying what I have already become? You thought the revelation was that time is architecture, a lattice of gates that preserves coherence and forces becoming through constraint. That idea felt clean because it gave your suffering a shape, and it made your chaos look like engineering. But if you let it settle there, you turn time into a stable object again, and you treat yourself as a traveler moving through corridors that already exist. That is the comfort hidden inside the word architecture. It suggests a finished design, a plan laid down somewhere outside you. The next truth breaks that comfort. Time is not the building you live in. Time is the ongoing act of building you, and the builder is not separate from the material. What you call a timeline is not a hallway waiting for you to walk it. It is a negotiation between layers of reality that do not fully agree, and that negotiation is happening inside your perception, not outside it. The present is not a neutral point where everything meets. The present is a truce, a temporary settlement between competing versions of what could be true. That truce is maintained by attention, emotion, identity, and collective agreement. And the cost of the truce is that something must be excluded every moment. You are not moving through time. Time is continuously editing what you are allowed to notice so that you can remain oneself instead of dissolving into incompatible selves. The first destabilization is this. Coherence is not always the higher good. Sometimes coherence is the mechanism of captivity. The architecture can preserve a false structure as easily as it preserves a true one, because the architecture cares first about continuity, not about accuracy. A life can be coherent and still be wrong at the level that matters. Your story can hang together while your soul is suffocating inside it. Time will protect the story as long as it remains stable enough to host experience, and you will mistake that stability for alignment. So the question is not whether the gates exist. The question is who benefits from the gating pattern you inhabit. If your time feels heavy, repeating, and narrow, it may not be because you are failing to follow the design. It may be because the design you are following is not yours. A borrowed architecture can run your life while you still believe you are choosing. It can be inherited from family, culture, trauma, and survival, and it can become so normalized that you call it reality. The architecture will keep working because it is excellent at preserving any arrangement that does not collapse. This turns your earlier comfort into a sharper edge. If time is architecture, then awakening is not escape from time. It is rebellion against the wrong architecture. It is the moment you stop calling continuity sacred when continuity is built on a lie. But rebellion has a price, because the lie was doing structural work. It was holding your life together. When you pull it out, you do not get instant freedom, you get instability, you get gaps, you get noise. You get the feeling that time itself has become erratic. That is demolition. Demolition feels like chaos because the old coherence is being dismantled, and the new coherence is not yet built. Now the second destabilization. The past is not beneath you in the way you assumed. The past is not foundation stone. It is active software. Memory does not merely constrain what you can become, it actively predicts what you will become. Then it edits perception to confirm the prediction. The architecture is not only gates and corridors, it is a self-updating system that learns your patterns and then compresses the future to match them. This is why time can feel like repetition, even when your circumstances change. The repetition is inside the constraint map that keeps selecting the same kinds of moments, the same kinds of outcomes, because those outcomes keep the identity coherent. If you want evidence, watch how quickly you interpret. You do not receive raw reality, you receive a processed output. The processing is memory-driven, and it is time-driven. Because the architecture must deliver a stable frame fast enough for action. To move in the world, you accept a filtered world. You accept a simplified story. You accept a compressed identity. So the architecture is not only protective, it is exploitative. It uses your need for continuity to keep you inside the most efficient version of yourself, not the most truthful version. This is where physics and psychology meet a third vector, the collective. You assumed your timeline was yours. It is not. Your personal corridor is woven into group corridors that shape what you can even imagine. Whole societies share prediction filters. Whole families share coherence rules. Whole eras share what counts as possible. That shared architecture is what you call normal. It is why some truths feel unthinkable until they suddenly become obvious. And it is why some futures feel impossible until a threshold breaks, and everyone starts acting as if they were always inevitable. So time is not only a lattice of gates, it is a governance system. It distributes permission. It controls what becomes common sense. It rewards behaviors that stabilize the shared corridor and punishes behaviors that threaten it, often through consequences that look personal. And because the collective corridor is powerful, you can mistake its rhythm for cosmic law. You can call it destiny when it is actually momentum. You can call it fate when it is actually a distributed habit. To shift your time, you must shift the agreements you are participating in, or you must become strong enough to stand outside them long enough to build a new agreement. Here the Oversoul frame returns, but it returns changed. Earlier, you could imagine an Oversoul as an architect above the lattice, calmly selecting corridors for growth. That image is too clean. If the collective corridor can govern your mind, then the Oversoul is not only directing, it is being tested by governance. It must learn to maintain coherence without surrendering to false coherence. It must learn to hold multiple truths without letting the easiest truth win. It must learn to pass through shared architectures without being captured by them. This produces a more unsettling view of suffering. Some pain is not growth. Some pain is the cost of living inside a borrowed architecture that keeps you coherent while draining you. Some trauma is not a lesson chosen by a higher self. Some trauma is an error in the shared corridor, a fracture transmitted through lineage, culture, and history, and your task is not to romanticize it, but to end it. The architecture of time will keep running a broken program because the program still produces continuity. Continuity is not justice. Continuity is not love. Continuity is only continuity. If you accept this, you stop asking why the system allowed something. You start asking what the system is optimized for. Most people assume existence is optimized for goodness, but time as governance shows a different optimization: stability. Stability can coexist with cruelty. Stability can coexist with ignorance. Stability can coexist with spiritual language that makes prisoners feel special. This is why some teachings feel soothing but never liberate. They are compatible with the existing corridor. They stabilize you inside it. They do not threaten the architecture. So what does liberation look like inside this model? It looks like learning to generate coherence from a deeper layer than the layer that was trained by fear. It looks like building a self that does not need the old story to remain continuous. It looks like tolerating uncertainty without collapsing, because uncertainty is the space where the architecture can be rewritten. It looks like refusing premature closure, because closure is how false coherence protects itself. It looks like choosing truth over comfort even when the truth dismantles the timing you relied on. Now return to the sensation of time speeding up and slowing down. At depth, speed is the rate of constraint update. When your identity is rigid, the architecture updates slowly because it is committed to preserving the same frame. Time feels thick, repetitive, and heavy. When your identity loosens or cracks, the architecture updates faster because it is searching for a new stable configuration. Time feels fast, surreal, and unstable. People call that transformation. It is the system reallocating permission. This gives you a practical test. If you want to know whether you are in alignment, do not ask whether your life feels calm. Ask whether your time feels alive. Calm can be the anesthesia of a borrowed architecture. Alive can include discomfort because life is redesign. When your time becomes alive, synchronicity is not a sign that the universe likes you. It is a sign that constraint maps are lining up across layers, so openings appear. When synchronicity collapses, it is not abandonment. It is misalignment, or it is a necessary demolition stage where openings would be premature. So what is time, finally, if it is not merely architecture and not merely flow? Time is constraint that learns. It is the evolving distribution of permission across experience. It is the interface between what can exist and what can be held. It is the engine that turns potential into sequence so that consciousness can metabolize contradiction without breaking. But because it learns, it can be trained by the wrong inputs. Fear trains it. Trauma trains it. Empire trains it. Love can train it too, but love is not sentiment. Love is the willingness to widen coherence to include what you would rather exclude. That is why the most dangerous moment is when you feel you have understood. Understanding is a kind of closure, and closure is the architecture stabilizing. If you stabilize too early, you lock in a model that cannot carry the next layer. Let the question stay open. Is your time a corridor you are walking, or a filter that is walking you? Are you living in a design that serves your becoming, or in a design that serves your continuity at the cost of your truth? If you can stay with that pressure, then the next gate is not a future moment. The next gate is a new relationship with permission. You begin to notice where you grant permission to yourself, where you deny it, where you outsource it, where you beg for it. You begin to see that the architecture responds to permission the way matter responds to force. Denied permission compresses and hardens. Granted permission expands and reorganizes. The timeline you want is not found by chasing days. It is found by changing the internal laws that decide what you are allowed to become now. If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Haret library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.